What happens when safety and amusement fail together? Today, I'm uncovering theme park days that went down in history for all the wrong reasons. Hi, I'm Timothy. From a man who stole a prize and ran into a restricted ride maintenance area, to a parkour creator who climbed high above an amusement park, never realizing his stunt would end deep underground. It was July 17th, 2018 at Carowinds in Charlotte, North Carolina, and the Midway had been busy since the gates opened that morning. Benish Brown was 33 years old and worked in retail at a mid-sized store in Charlotte. He was the kind of person who never walked past a game of chance without stopping. Scratch cards, arcade machines, carnival games, raffles, anything with a prize attached pulled his attention immediately. He rarely won anything significant, but had spent years convincing himself that persistence was the same as strategy. If he stayed in long enough, the outcome would eventually turn in his favor. That belief had cost him money many times before and had never once stopped him from trying again. I think about that line he believed for years, that persistence equals strategy. A lot of people lose money believing that exact thing. Very few let that frustration push them into doing what Benish did next. Near the center of the Midway was a popular game booth displaying a large electronic prize that had drawn attention all day. Guests stopped regularly to watch the booth operator demonstrate how it worked. Winning required skill and timing and was genuinely difficult, but not impossible. The moment Benish saw the prize, he decided he was leaving with it. He paid for a few attempts and failed, then bought more, then more after that. Hours passed, and the losses kept coming. Each one made him more convinced that he was close and that stopping now would mean wasting everything he had already put in. Other guests came and went. Benish stayed at the booth and kept playing. By mid-afternoon, he had spent several $100s, and his mood had shifted from excitement to frustration to something closer to anger. He started accusing the game of being rigged. He complained to the booth operator and insisted the game was not functioning fairly. The employee explained that the game operated normally and that every player faced the same odds. Benish did not accept that answer. By evening, the frustration had built into something he was no longer managing. He climbed over the counter and grabbed the prize. This is the part where we're gonna try to understand what happened, and it happened fast enough that nearby guests froze before reacting. The booth operator contacted park security immediately, and within moments, officers were moving toward his location. Benish ran through the Midway carrying the prize while guests stepped aside and security followed. Additional officers were alerted by radio, and the gap between them closed quickly as he moved deeper into the park. Desperate and running out of open ground, he spotted a fence. Large signs marked the area beyond it as restricted and warned guests to stay out. It was a maintenance zone used by park employees to access ride equipment and required specific safety training before anyone was permitted inside. Benish went over the fence anyway. Security shouted for him to stop. He kept running. The maintenance zone was not built for anyone without that training. Walkways ended without warning. Equipment filled much of the space, and several attractions were operating nearby. Benish was focused entirely on putting distance between himself and the officers behind him. He ran directly into the path of an operating ride. The ride struck him before operators could bring it to a full stop. The impact was immediate, and the injuries to his head and torso were catastrophic. He was found a short distance from the point of contact and showed no signs of life when emergency responders reached him. Benish Brown died at the scene. Investigators found no fault with the ride or its operating systems. The attraction had been running normally, and the restricted area had been clearly marked. The electronic prize he had climbed a counter to take was still sitting behind the booth when the park closed that night. The next one I'm about to talk about is a young man who had been making one quiet, bad decision for months before he ever walked through the park gates. It was the morning of September 5th, 2020, at a large amusement park in Georgia. Families filled the walkways, children carried prizes from carnival games, and long lines stretched outside the most popular rides. Nedrick Beaufort was 23 years old and worked long hours at a warehouse. His family had struggled financially for years, and extra money was always hard to come by. When his younger sister's birthday came around, Nedrick decided he wanted to do something special for her. For months, he worked extra shifts, cut back on spending, and saved a little whenever he could until he had enough for an amusement park trip. The planning helped him push aside a problem he had been dealing with for months. Every now and then, he felt pain in his chest. Sometimes he got short of breath, dizzy, or unusually tired. The symptoms always improved after he rested, so he told himself it was nothing serious. With money already tight, he did not want to spend what little he had saved on medical tests. He bought over-the-counter medicine when the discomfort returned and kept going with his normal routine. He was saving for his sister's birthday, while his body was already sending him signals he could not afford to ignore, not expecting what comes next. On the morning of the trip, he woke up with the familiar ache in his chest. For a moment, he thought about staying home. Then he remembered how excited his sister had been. She had been counting down the days for weeks. Nedrick got up and got ready. They arrived shortly after the park opened. Nedrick spent the day making sure his sister had a good time. He carried her backpack, bought snacks, took photographs, and followed her from one attraction to the next. He never mentioned how he was feeling because he did not want to worry her or spoil the day. That is the kind of person Nedrick was, feeling everything he was feeling and saying absolutely nothing about it because it was her day. As the afternoon went on, he became increasingly tired. Hours of walking, standing in long lines, and dealing with the summer heat slowly wore him down. Several times he stopped to rest when the discomfort in his chest came back. He said nothing each time. Late in the afternoon, he won a large stuffed toy at one of the carnival games and gave it to his sister. She hugged him. A few minutes later, she asked him to join her on her favorite thrill ride. He looked exhausted, but he smiled and said yes. His sister waited below holding the stuffed toy while Nedrick boarded. The ride launched into sharp turns, sudden drops, and high-speed movements. By that point, Nedrick's body was already under real strain. The long day of walking, heat, and exhaustion had been placing extra pressure on his heart for hours. The sudden rush of adrenaline from the ride pushed that strain further than his heart could handle. He started feeling dizzy almost immediately. He struggled to catch his breath. His vision began to blur. Then he lost consciousness in his seat. When the ride returned to the station, operators noticed straight away that something was wrong. Nedrick was slumped in his seat and did not respond when they spoke to him. Staff cleared the area and called for help immediately. Park medical personnel reached him within minutes and began CPR at the scene before paramedics arrived and transported him to a nearby hospital. Doctors later determined Nedrick had undiagnosed hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a condition that causes abnormal thickening of the heart muscle. It had almost certainly been responsible for the chest pain, dizziness, and fatigue he had been experiencing for months. The physical demands of the day, combined with the adrenaline surge from the ride, triggered a fatal cardiac arrhythmia. Despite extensive efforts by medical staff, Nedrick never regained consciousness. He died later that evening. The stuffed toy he won for her stayed beside her throughout the long hours at the hospital. I wonder how his sister will have to live with this for the rest of her life. The trip he had spent months saving for became the last day his sister would spend with him. Nedrick's case breaks me every time. But our next story takes us to Georgia. Zephyr came to the park to get a shot nobody else had. And unlike Nedrick, he knew exactly what he was walking into and still did it. It was the afternoon of June 18, 2022, in Austell, Georgia, and the park was running at full noise that day. Zephyr Jovi was 21 and had just finished college. His friends knew him as someone who never backed down from a challenge. Over the years, he had built that reputation through risky decisions, climbing places he should not have climbed, going where he was told not to go, and filming much of it. Nothing had ever gone seriously wrong, and that streak had convinced him he was more skilled than lucky. He came to the amusement park with friends to celebrate graduation. After spending the morning on rides and taking photos, they gathered near one of the park's largest roller coasters. The towering ride dominated the area, its trains racing through the tracks so fast that people often stopped what they were doing just to watch. The group stood near it for a while. Someone started joking about social media and who would come away with the most impressive video from the day. One person said the best possible shot would come from inside the restricted maintenance area beneath the coaster structure, where a passing train would clear overhead by only a few feet. Everyone laughed at the idea, and the conversation kept moving. Most of them let it go. Everyone in that group heard the same idea and walked away from it except one person. I have met people like that, and trust me, they are not usually the smartest. Zephyr did not. He stayed there quietly while his friends talked. The more he thought about the video, the more he wanted it. None of his friends had a video of themselves standing under an active roller coaster. That was what made it special to him. A short time later, he left the group without telling anyone where he was going. Earlier, he had noticed a maintenance area near the ride. A barrier and warning sign told guests to stay out, but Zephyr stepped over it anyway. The area under the coaster was darker and quieter than the rest of the park. He opened his camera and walked beneath the track. After finding a good spot, he held up his phone and adjusted the angle. In the distance, he could hear a train coming, and hearing that alone is something that he must have thought about, but what's even harder to sit with is what comes next. The sound of an approaching coaster train moves through the structure before it arrives. There is a low mechanical build and then a sharp rushing noise as it closes in. Zephyr heard it growing. He took one last small step to sharpen the shot and kept his eyes on the screen. The train was moving at over 50 miles per hour when it reached him. The undercarriage and wheel assembly extended below the rail line, and Zephyr was standing directly inside the operational clearance zone. The train struck him across the upper body in under a second. The force was concentrated at his neck and upper chest. His trachea collapsed on impact, and his cervical spine was fractured at the point of contact. The damage to his airway was immediate and total. He was thrown from his feet and landed several feet away on the ground beneath the structure. His phone came to rest nearby. The recording had already stopped. Park staff reached the area within minutes and shut the ride down immediately. Paramedics arrived and began working, but the injuries were not survivable. Zephyr Jovi was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death was catastrophic neck and chest trauma resulting from impact with the moving roller coaster train. His friends were somewhere in that park waiting for him to come back. They had no idea where he had gone. I cannot imagine being one of them that afternoon. The ride remained closed for the rest of the day while investigators examined the scene and reviewed security footage. After confirming there was no mechanical failure, the coaster reopened and the park reinforced barriers and warning signs around restricted maintenance areas. Investigators found no fault with the ride. Zephyr had entered voluntarily and positioned himself inside a clearance area that existed only for the mechanical operation of the train. Zephyr had assumed that open space meant safe space. It did not. The next case I found is not the same with other cases in this video. The two ended up at that park together, and the history between them was far darker than anything happening around them. It was October 31st, 2019, at a large amusement park in Georgia, and the park was full. Arietta McBride was 29 years old and owned a small salon she had opened in 2017 after years of saving. The business was not a huge success, but it was growing steadily. Outside of work, the most important person in her life was her mother Denise, who suffered from severe epilepsy and needed regular medication and supervision whenever Arietta could not be there. The person she trusted most with that responsibility was Talitha Jasiri. The two had been friends since childhood. In early 2018, Arietta received the biggest opportunity of her career. A wealthy client hired her to work a bridal event in another city for several days. She asked Talitha to check on her mother daily while she was gone. Talitha agreed without hesitation. Arietta returned home to find her mother had suffered a severe seizure alone. By the time emergency services were involved, it was too late. Denise was gone. Then Arietta found out Talitha had never visited once. Messages had gone unanswered, calls ignored, and neighbors confirmed they had not seen Talitha near the house at all during those days. The friendship ended immediately. For months, Arietta struggled with grief while her salon lost customers, and bills became harder to manage. She lost her mother and her closest friend in the same week. And she still had to go back to work the following Monday and act like she was holding it together. More than a year later, Talitha reached out and apologized. Arietta ignored the messages for a long time before finally agreeing to meet, not out of forgiveness, but simply to hear what she had to say. Talitha suggested an amusement park in Georgia on October 31st. The conversation was uncomfortable from the start. Talitha apologized repeatedly while Arietta listened and offered very little back. Later that afternoon, Talitha suggested riding one of the park's older roller coasters, and Arietta agreed. As operators completed safety checks before departure, Arietta noticed Talitha shifting repeatedly in her seat, adjusting her position beneath the restraint in a way that looked uncomfortable. The restraint appeared to sit slightly higher than others along the row. "I want you to notice something here." Arietta noticed something looked wrong before the ride even started. She almost said something. And then she watched an operator check the train and move on. I wonder if she did it on purpose. Arietta considered saying something but stayed quiet after watching an operator check the train and move on. The coaster left the station. As the train climbed the first hill, Talitha was still talking. Then it dropped into the first descent, and everything changed. The restraint that had not properly engaged lifted further as the forces increased through the first series of turns. Talitha's body shifted in her seat as the forces increased, and the restraint that had never fully engaged slipped further upward. By the third turn, she had no meaningful contact with the seat beneath her. She was ejected and fell from the moving train, striking the track structure below. The impact was immediate, and the fall from that height left her with injuries that were not compatible with survival. The ride completed its course and returned to the station. Emergency services were called immediately. Ride operators stopped normal operations and secured the area while emergency personnel responded. Despite their efforts, Talitha Jasiri died from injuries suffered during the ride. Investigators determined the restraint had not fully engaged before departure and that her repeated shifting had contributed to the failure. The coaster, originally built decades earlier, lacked the secondary restraint monitoring systems found on newer attractions. Investigators later questioned Arietta about the ride. She never mentioned noticing the unusual restraint position before departure, and that detail did not become part of the official investigation. For Arietta, the outcome brought nothing close to relief. Her mother was still gone, her salon was still struggling, and the friendship that had cost her everything could never be repaired, regardless of how it ended. That case left me with more questions than answers. The next one is far more straightforward. A woman who spent an entire day being told no and decided none of it applied to her. It was August 27, 2014, at a water park in San Antonio, Texas, and the crowds had been thick since the gates opened that morning. Saskia Cuban was 48 years old and worked in middle management at a logistics company. She arrived at the park already in a bad mood. Earlier that morning, she had argued with staff at a restaurant over a pancake and pushed it across the counter in frustration. Throughout the day, she continued complaining about long lines, demanding refunds, and acting as though the park's rules did not apply to her. I have met people like Saskia before, and the pattern is always the same. Every rule feels personal. Every boundary feels like an insult, but it never ends well. By late afternoon, she had made her way to one of the most popular attractions in the park, a cliff-style diving platform that sent guests jumping from roughly 30 feet into a deep landing pool below. When Saskia arrived, she found a barrier across the entrance and a small group of guests standing outside it waiting. The attraction had been closed. Earlier that afternoon, employees temporarily closed the diving attraction after discovering the landing pool was below the required depth for safe operation. Staff explained that maintenance crews were refilling the pool and completing safety checks before reopening, a process expected to take only a few minutes. Saskia was not interested in waiting. When employees told her the attraction would remain closed until the inspection was complete, she insisted the pool looked perfectly fine. Staff repeatedly explained that appearances did not matter and that safety requirements had to be met before anyone could jump. Saskia continued arguing. Then, ignoring every warning she had been given, she climbed over the barrier. Every single employee at that attraction told her the same thing. And she looked at all of them and decided she knew better than every one of them combined. It still amazes me. The moment she cleared the barrier, employees began shouting for her to stop. 2 workers moved toward her immediately, while another radioed for security. Saskia ignored all of it. She walked past the restricted area markers and reached the base of the staircase leading up to the platform. Staff were moving toward her, but she had already started climbing before anyone reached the bottom step. She made it to the top before any employee could get to her. She looked down at the pool for a moment. Then she jumped. I am not sure she knew what was waiting for her at the bottom. The pool had not been restored to its required depth. At the time Saskia left the platform, the water level sat at approximately 6 feet. Half of what the attraction required for safe use. She entered feet first from 30 feet above, and the shallow water did almost nothing to slow her descent. Her feet made contact with the bottom of the pool with enough force to cause immediate and serious damage to her lower spine. The impact also drove trauma upward through her back and into her head as her body compressed on contact. She did not surface on her own and showed no movement in the water after hitting the bottom. Lifeguards entered the water immediately and pulled her to the surface. She was unresponsive and not breathing. Emergency medical staff already inside the park reached the pool within moments and began resuscitation on the deck, while other employees cleared guests from the area. Paramedics continued working on her through transport to a nearby trauma center where doctors began emergency treatment. The injuries were not survivable. Saskia Cuban died from the combined effects of her spinal fractures and the traumatic brain injury she sustained when she struck the bottom of the pool. Investigators reviewed security footage and interviewed staff and witnesses. They found no fault with the attraction or its safety systems. Saskia's outcome was the direct result of her own decisions. Azalea's story was different. She made no mistakes at all. It was October 12, 2013 in San Antonio, and the park was busy the way it always was on a weekend in fall. Azalea Nomi was 28 years old and taught kindergarten at an elementary school not far from where she grew up. Patient, warm, the kind of person who showed up for other people without being asked. What most of them did not know was how much she had been quietly carrying for years. Heights were the clearest version of it. She had been afraid of them since childhood, and the fear had gotten worse after a difficult stretch in her mid-20s when she lost her sister, who fell from a 2-story building and lost her life. She decided to start pushing back against it. She began with small things and worked forward over several months. Each time she got through something she had previously avoided, she took a photograph as a record. Her friends treated every milestone like it mattered, because to Azalea, it genuinely did. I think about those photographs. A personal record of every fear she faced and survived. That is one of the bravest things I have ever heard someone do quietly. The trip to the amusement park was supposed to be another entry in that record. She had done well for most of the day, riding several attractions she would have walked past a year earlier. By afternoon, she was ready for the ride she had been thinking about since they arrived. A giant pendulum attraction near the center of the park that swung riders in a wide arc high above the midway while rotating the gondola through the air. At the peak of each swing, riders reached roughly 80 feet above the ground. Azalea watched a full cycle from the exit before joining the queue. She looked nervous when she boarded, but she got on anyway. Employees secured the restraints, and the arm began its first slow movement, building momentum with each swing. Azalea kept her grip tight and her eyes open. She watched the full cycle before she got in line. She knew exactly how high it went, and she got on anyway. I have a lot of respect for that. Several minutes into the cycle, something changed. A sound came from the upper portion of the ride structure that did not belong to normal operation. Seconds later, a connector fitting forming part of the load-bearing joint between the pendulum arm and the gondola frame fractured under operational stress. The defect had developed deep within the metal over time and had never been detected because it existed below the surface where standard inspections could not reach. When the fitting gave way, the gondola lost its controlled path mid-arc. The sudden shift threw Azalea hard into her harness. Several other riders suffered minor to moderate injuries from the violent jolt, but Azalea was seated closest to the failed connection point. When the gondola shifted, her position experienced the most severe forces on the ride. She sustained multiple rib fractures, a punctured lung, internal abdominal bleeding, and spinal fractures at the lower thoracic region. She was conscious when the ride stopped but could not move and was struggling to breathe. Operators cut power and emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics reached her while she was still in the gondola and began treatment on site before transporting her to a nearby trauma center. Surgeons worked to address the internal bleeding and the punctured lung, but the combination of injuries was too extensive to stabilize. Azalea Nomi died a short time after arriving at the hospital. Investigators spent weeks examining the failed component and reviewing maintenance records. They found that the fracture had originated from a rare internal material defect that had gone undetected because it existed below the surface of the metal. The park's inspection schedule had met every required standard, but somehow something went wrong on that particular day. Talk about bad luck. Azalea had spent months building toward that day. She had faced the thing she was most afraid of and gotten on the ride anyway, and it ended up in the worst way ever. The last case happened in Florida. He tried to do the perfect stunt for views, but ended up being a perfect warning. It was October 31st, 2017, at a large amusement park in Orlando, Florida, and the park was busy the way it always was on a weekend in fall. Caspian Arrow was 28 years old and worked part-time as a fitness instructor, but spent most of his time and energy on content. For years, he had built a following online by posting parkour videos filmed in public spaces. Low walls, railings, staircases, urban obstacles of all kinds had appeared in his videos, and the footage worked because it looked dangerous while staying just within what he could actually do. His audience had grown steadily, and with it came something that changed the nature of the work. The pressure to keep delivering something new and bigger than the last video had become a constant presence in how he thought about every location he walked through. A few months before the trip, another creator posted a video filmed from a significant height that pulled in millions of views almost immediately. Caspian watched it multiple times and spent weeks thinking about how to produce something that matched it. Friends noticed the shift and told him that chasing increasingly dangerous locations was becoming a pattern worth paying attention to. Caspian told them he knew his limits and that people consistently underestimated how calculated his decisions actually were. I find that phrase telling. Calling something calculated is usually the way people describe risk to themselves right before the calculation stops holding up. On October 31st, he arrived at the park with his camera and a plan to film throughout the day. The morning went well. He recorded clips near walkways, fountains, themed structures, and open public areas where guests gathered naturally. A few followers who recognized him stopped for photographs. By early afternoon, he had enough footage for a solid video, and any reasonable version of the day would have ended there. Caspian kept looking. While moving through one section of the park, he noticed an elevated themed structure that rose above the surrounding area and offered a clear view across a large portion of the park below. Decorative barriers had been placed around the base, and warning signs told guests clearly to stay out. The structure was not part of any attraction and had not been designed with guests in mind. From the right angle, it would look like he was standing high above the entire park. He stepped over the barrier. A few people nearby watched him do it. Some assumed he worked there because of how confidently he moved through the restricted space. Others called out for him to come back. Caspian ignored all of it and kept climbing until he reached the elevated section he had been aiming for. What strikes me is that his confidence was the thing that protected him. People assumed someone moving that calmly must have permission to be there. He took out his camera and began setting up the shot. The surface beneath him was not designed to be stood on. Unlike the public walkways below, there was nothing to arrest a fall if his footing gave way. As he adjusted his position and worked on the camera angle, his foot slipped. He had no time to recover. Caspian fell several stories and landed on the structure below. He sustained severe traumatic injuries to his head and torso on impact and was found unresponsive by park employees who reached the area within minutes. Emergency services were called immediately, and paramedics began treatment on site before transporting him to a nearby hospital. The injuries were not survivable. Caspian Arrow died later that day. He had enough videos already. One more video ended up being his last video. Investigators found no fault with the park. Witnesses confirmed that Caspian had deliberately crossed barriers and ignored warning signs before entering the restricted area. Following the incident, park officials reviewed the area and reinforced existing safety measures to discourage unauthorized access.